been really exciting to get this organized and to see the interest and to know that people are doing this step of trying to learn more and understand what's happening with racial justice issues in our country. So I'm a co-chair of the Synod's racial justice team, and most of you probably registered already through our website on the Synod webpage. If you go to Connectedness and go down to racial justice, you'll find our page there, and that has my email address. Just if you feel afterwards that you want to have any additional follow-up, feel free to email me. You'll also find there some links to other resources. Resources abound these days. And so, help yourself to what kind of speaks to you. So tonight we're starting with sort of some basic understandings about race and racism and white privilege and the definitions and how they work in our world. And our speaker is Pastor Patrick Hagen. He's the pastor at Journey of Faith in Randallstown. He was chair of this committee for 3-4 years or so, and he's done a lot of racial justice work in Detroit before he came to Baltimore. So I consider him like a rock star of racial justice. Anyway, he's one of my inspirations. So Patrick, go ahead and we'll try to have some presentation and then I think a video, and we'll try to pause for comments and questions through the chat box, and he'll give you any further instructions that you need, and I'll be here and we'll be here to manage it as we go through.
And Kathy, forgive me, isn't it good for people allowed to put in the chat box questions now that you all would be looking at? Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Whenever you feel like, yes, as questions come up, just go ahead and put them in the chat box.
Okay.
Whenever you want.
Yep. Thank you, Kathy, and everyone for being here this evening. It's again quite warm outside, so hopefully it's cooler where you are. And this is still a different way to gather that we've had to adjust to in this time in which we're living in. And I've gotten a little better at Zoom myself, so hopefully you have it also. But again, it's great that you're here this evening, and it's a incredible time for us to unpack and talk about the understanding of race and how it becomes real in racism, and then sit and understand some things about what white privilege is. And so I'm thankful for everyone who is with us. So I'm going to move us into the presentation, and what I'm going to also do then is I am going to oh, where is it now? It always is hard to find when you exactly need to. So hopefully, I don't think it's quite open yet. Is it open up and share? Kathy, can you see it?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. All right. So this is just a quick agenda of what I hope we can accomplish together this evening.
I think it went away. Now we've got a green screen.
We got a green.
There we go.
It's back?
Back.
Okay. All right. So yeah, let me know if it isn't seen. So what we're going to do this evening together is to begin with prayer. We're going to go into scripture and talk a little bit in the beginning here about cultural shifts that often need to occur within our congregations in order to address racism, in order for us to become anti-racist in our own living. I'll stop in the presentation for a quick break to hear anything put in the chat box, and then we'll go into talking about exactly what white privilege is, and then we'll have everyone in their small groups. And again, our goals for the night are that we're going to provide a broad working definition for race and racism. We're going to develop tools for identifying racism and how it affects our lives. And then finally, we're going to discuss white privilege, or what also may be termed surplus suffering. So those are the main goals for tonight, and I hope we're able to accomplish them. So let us begin with a moment of prayer, if we could, please. Lord God, we thank you for this moment we have with you and each other. Lord, we span across a large geographical area. We ask that by your Holy Spirit, you would bring us together, and that by your Spirit, you will continue, Lord, to remove from the evil and the sin among us, particularly, Lord, with racism, to help us not just see each other as a child of God, but to live together as you create us to do. Bless us with your Spirit, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen. So the two scriptures I wanted us to look at are found in the book of Genesis and then in the Gospel of Mark. And so with the book of Genesis, this is a familiar text, of course, with the first creation account. And as it states there in verse 26, then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. So God created humankind in God's image. In the image of God, God created them. Male and female, God created them. There's also, of course, the second creation account where God forms two humans, Adam and Eve. And I think from both of those, what we can take is our theological foundation, our theological grounding, that no matter your color, no matter your class, no matter your nationality, your religion, no matter what it is of how you may be identified or what's particular to you, we all are created in the image of God. So we always want to start there. And even if you go from Adam and Eve, you see how God is stating how we all come from the same family. We're all descendants together. Just some of our descendants left Africa early than others, and we spread out throughout the world. And so we have differences, but often we don't see each other in the same way we should. So that is where we start. And for many of us, we want to say, you know, that's just it. Theologically, we're all children of God. So let's just leave it at that. But the reality is we live in a world that doesn't look like that. We live in a world that doesn't honor that teaching and that understanding. And so we have to be able to talk about reality and talk about what's real in the world and then what's real in our churches and real with us. And so the next scripture I want to share, we actually looked at this yesterday here at Journey of Faith, is Mark chapter 2. And what it reads is, when Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door. And he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by four of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. And the reason I thought this is another good scripture to ground ourselves in is this whole image of Jesus teaching, Jesus speaking. And in the home, people have gathered, just like we gathered together. And of course, not in person at this point as we used to, but we gathered together around God's word also. We gathered together around the presence of Jesus and bread and wine and water and the word. And so we also gather around Jesus to learn and to hear and to become his disciples. But at the same time, we can often be in a way that others can't get to Jesus. And there was no room for them in this place to get into this house where Jesus was. Now, if your congregation is like my congregation, we have plenty of room. We have plenty of pews wide open. You can have your own pew, in fact, if you want to come on down. And so, yes, we have room in our churches, but so often we don't have space. They made no space for this man and his friends to come in to receive healing, to be part of the community. And so the challenge is, how do we create that space? How do we create space for tough talk? How do we create space for being challenged? Because often that's a cultural shift that has to happen in our congregations. We have to be willing to sit with some very difficult teachings and ideas and being challenged. But unfortunately, too often, we don't want to be challenged. And so you can see, again, some of the shifts to take place is where we have lots of room but don't have space. And how do we make space for discussions like we are this evening? Also, how do we create a culture of listening as much as we do talking? And this is a lesson I got from a gentleman named Timothy Law, who does a lot of work in anti-racism work. And he highlighted something I never saw before. That the Pentecost moment, when the Holy Spirit fell upon the disciples, we always see it as a gift of the tongue, of the gift of proclamation with our mouth, of saying and sharing and speaking what God has done. But if you look at the question that's asked there in verse 7, those who heard it asked the question about how we hear, each of us, in our own native language. So he was proposing that, was it really the disciples' tongues that would change? Were they able to speak in all these different ways? Or was it a miracle of the ear, like miracle ear, the device that enables better hearing for us? And so that's part of one of the things is, how do we hear? How do we learn to listen to other people's stories, other people's experiences, and honor them instead of trying to compare it to mine, to negate it, or to say, oh, I don't need to hear that. And so it's very important for us to use our ears at this time and realize that challenging topics and conversations will not kill you. We, again, when our feathers get ruffled, we tend to not know what to do. And I found in a lot of times in our churches, we created that culture of comfort and convenience. And when someone does get their feathers ruffled, everyone's like, oh, please don't do that again. It upset us. Where, you know, the gospel is very upsetting, at the same time soothing and liberating. It holds those two ideas together in that tension. That's it. And so also take time to breathe. When you're getting tense, when a topic is very challenging, I've learned to breathe and just be in the moment and wonder, what is God trying to show me and teach me at this time? And then finally, trust the fact that love can handle it. If love is within our congregations, is love in our heart, if love is what we're about, we can handle difficult conversations. We can delve into some very hard topics and work, because again, when we speak the truth in love, like Ephesians 4 says, love will bring us through. That's just a few ideas I like to present before we begin to jump in to our topic, because there's probably no topic in this country right now for sure, and throughout the world, that elicits those feelings of either anger or sadness or fear or whatever it may be, than talking about race and racism. And I want to acknowledge that, but then I want to remind you that love can handle it. So here we go. We're going to start and talk about race. And the first thing I want to begin with is the understanding that race is not real. In that there are different races of people. Race is not real from a biological or theological perspective. Now, I already told you the theological foundation of we're all created in the image of God. But even biologically, there may be some subtle differences, but the essence of who we are, the essence of how we are made, is all the same. It's not grounded in anything real. But unfortunately, through the years and even today, there's bad theology and what I call pseudoscience that still continues to justify race. And sometimes that theological teaching is what's called the curse of Ham, if you're familiar with the story of Noah and his sons, and how his son Ham was cursed by Noah. And it's often been used by those who look to dominate over others, that the people of color and others are those born out of Ham's line of descendants. And so that foolishness is still out there. Eugenics, of course, the practice of playing with genes and like to create a master race, controlling people's bodies. There's a long history in this country of women, African descent, African-American women who were sterilized without any knowledge of or approval of. In fact, Fannie Lou Hamer, the great civil rights fighter, she had been sterilized when she went in for just a routine procedure. So again, eugenics is not real. It's part of pseudoscience. And even the idea of evolution in some sense, I'm not here to debate evolution or creation, but evolution has been used in a way to say that, you know, white folks have evolved longer. We've been here more, we're ahead of other quote unquote races, again, that isn't real. Instead of looking at what's called Lamarckian evolution, that looks at how over time, as people spread out throughout the planet, how we all came out of Africa, which science has shown us, but then we spread throughout the world. And over time, with climate and with foods and with sunlight and all that, impacted how we changed and how our hair texture changed and our skin color and everything else. So again, there is ways it's used to justify what isn't real. So what is race? Race is a socio-political construct, and that exists to determine winners and losers, to define what is normal or what is abnormal, who is superior or inferior, based simply on the color of one's skin. So in essence, race isn't real, which is what is so complicated, because it is real, because we see it at work in our lives. We see color, but we don't see race. But we take God's color and we made races of us. So race is static and in some ways changes based upon who is deciding what race somebody is ascribed to. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of the history of that this evening also. So it's very difficult to rid ourselves of something that doesn't even exist. It permeates every aspect of our life. And truly, again, no matter where we live, race has an effect upon us and what we have and who we are. So let me move on to the next slide then. So here's a definition of race that I would propose to you. It's not mine. It comes from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. But race is a species intentionally deceptive and untrue socio-biological classification created by Europeans during the time of worldwide colonial expansion to assign human worth and social status, using themselves as the model of humanity for the purpose of legitimizing white power and white skin privilege. So again, race is a species intentionally deceptive and untrue socio-biological classification created by Europeans during the time of worldwide colonial expansion to assign human worth and social status, using themselves as a model of humanity for the purpose of legitimizing white power and white skin privilege. So in essence, race hasn't always been around. Other societies, of course, spoke of themselves in different ways, and there's different ethnicities and religions. But the whole idea of race really came about in the 1500s. And of course, the 1500s were a time of great change, much like we're living through right now. In 1450, the printing press had been invented. It changed how information was shared, which, by the way, with cell phones and the internet, we're living through that new revolution right now, which we don't seem to figure out how we're going to live together. And this way information is shared, both good information and misinformation. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We all learned that rhyme at school one time or another. And what's ironic is the name Christopher actually means Christ bearer. And so there's a close linkage between Christopher Columbus and exploration and expansion and the Christian church. There's a deep connection there that we have to continue to unpack and look at and own up for what that means. Also, of course, 1517, Lutheran Reformation took place. The European powers were at war, the Spanish Armada, and others came in the 1500s. And so what was happening is Europeans were looking for new places to get more resources. How do we fight these wars against each other? And they began to sail more in the ocean. Technology allowed them to explore, and they started to encounter these different lands and different people. And again, looking for resources, looking for gold, looking for any precious metals, but also looking for land and later for labor. And so, but how do you juggle the enslavement or conquering of people if you're also a Christian, a follower of Christ? How do we hold those two in tension in some way or another? And so what did happen then is that this idea of race was created, again, coinciding with about the same time. In the early part of race that was devised is that there were 4 races of people. You have the Caucasoids, which of course we now call Caucasians, which comes from the Caucasus Mountains in Russia. Again, you got something geographical, you have something land related. The Caucasoids, Caucasians from Russia. The Mongoloids from Mongolia, Asia. So this was the category given to Asians as they encountered them through exploration. Then you had the Australoid, which in essence are the Aboriginals of Australia. So I want you to look though quickly how Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Australoid all have a tie to land. Caucasoid, Russia; Mongoloid, Mongolia; Australoid, Australia. But then the fourth category of race that was created was Negroid. But where is Negroid? It's not Africaoid, it's Negroid. In essence, of course, it comes from the Spanish word for black, negro, but in essence, what it was saying is that these people, right? These folks, black folks, have no land, no home, which is part of what could justify taking them from something that isn't a part of them. So this was part of how race became into our consciousness and how it became into part of practice as well. And I want you to look at this for a moment. This is so critical, I believe, when we understand race. At one point in this country, a person's race could literally change based upon the state line they were crossing into. So for instance, if you lived in Florida at this time, this in the early 1900s, and actually leading up even into the 1950s, Florida would designate you as black, if you would, if you're 1/8 black. In other words, if you had one great-grandparent, you were considered black, all right? So 1/8 great-grandparent, 1/8 black, if you would. In Alabama, which is just across the state line from Florida, they said you were black if you were 1/16 black. So 1/16, meaning that now we're gonna go back another generation. So instead of just a great-grandparent, we're gonna go great-great-grandparent. And by tracing your ancestry, by looking at who you've come from, your ancestors, then we can see if you're black or white. And actually, I didn't have this here. Mississippi was one more of Alabama. They took even one more step. 1/32 is what Mississippi said. So Mississippi, they could go back to your great-great-great-grandparent, and if anyone in your ancestry line was black, you were then considered black. And what would that mean then, right? If you're black, then suddenly you were not entitled, you were not allowed to live in certain places, work at certain places, have certain jobs, so it had real material consequences. And once they could determine your race, they could determine your destiny. Just like today in many ways, your color determines where you live, where you go to school, how you're treated. All those things still play out. So if race is real or fixed, then how can your race change when you cross the state line? My ancestors came from Ireland, and my ancestor's name was Mick Hagen. Well, if you know the history of the Irish were looked down upon as the dogs of Europe, a lesser race, actually, of people. So my great-great-grandfather decided, I'm going to change the name and come get Hagen, because Irish need not apply with the signs of that time. And so again, this concept of race is so vile and complicated of how it plays out. So I just want you to wrap your mind around the fact that race isn't real. Color, culture, ethnicities, all that, very real. But it's not real, which is why it's so complicated to deal with. How do you get rid of something that isn't real from the beginning? How do you undo an untruth that so much has been based upon for us? So let me see, Kathy, Rebecca, any questions I can address right now?
Well,
there is one question from Brad about just a question, what about Christians from North Africa?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that question came up when you're talking about Christopher Columbus.
Well, I'm talking more about when I say the church, the Western church, what we would call the Roman Catholic Church today, is where they were very entangled with the whole colonialism and exploration that took place. So that's where I was basing that from. And again, it's a complicated history for us when you look at what has been done to people in the name of Christ. That's why it's always dangerous when your own faith calls for you to look down or lessen somebody. And of course, the words that were used to describe people of other lands, savages, uncivilized, they were given these labels and names, which if I can dehumanize you, which is what they were trying to do, if I can dehumanize you, make you less than human, then I can justify how I treat you. Because do unto others, you have them do unto you. Well, what if they're not human then? What if they're more animalistic, savage, and the like? And so that's why terms is so important. The power to name, that's one of the powers God gave to Adam and Eve, is to name, name things. So naming is critical today. Is that it?
Yeah, that's all we have so far. There was some conversation about the evolution, and then there was a website given on the chat so people can look up what you were referring to.
Okay.
So we're good to go, I think.
All right. So the first thing I just want us to wrap our minds around is the truth, the fact that race isn't real, but yet it is. It has life or death implications in so many ways. It has determined so much of our destiny based upon the color of our skin, and how we're seen, and how we are viewed, and how we experience life. And I'll begin to talk more about that as well. So let me move on. So now we're going to go into racism. And this is one of the most important parts of tonight's discussion with you, is what is racism? Exactly when we say this, what do we mean? Because I know a lot of times for us white folks, for us, racism is if you say or do something personally that's racist, right? If you say or do something that's prejudicial against somebody based upon the color of their skin, or based upon where they're from, their country, whatever it may be. But so often we just break racism down to don't say that because it's racist, which it may be, yeah, so don't say it. But racism, once again, is so much deeper than that. Much like race itself is so much deeper than how we understand it often, speak of it. Racism is far more subtle and but yet far more real when we open our eyes to see it. And it's now often, although today that seems to be changing, unfortunately, but in some ways we can see where people are, but racism today is more covert. It's not, colored only signs, whites only signs. It's not, quote unquote, as visible to some. And so we broke it down to just, I'm not racist, because I don't say that. I don't do that. I have Black friends. I'm going to talk about that more later as well. So I want us to get deeper and really look at racism, where it really, if you would, kills, steals, and destroys. And so first, let's start with power. And these are some generic definitions. You could probably come up with much better than I just want to present you with some ideas. But basically, power is the ability to act as desired, right? You have the power to do. My children often lament they don't feel they have the power to do as they wish, because they don't, because my wife and I do, in limiting what they can do, based upon, of course, their own health and sometimes our own sanity. So power is the ability to act as desired. Systemic power then is legitimate legal ability to access and or control those institutions sanctioned by the state. So systemic power takes from just being an individual to individuals, to community, to institutions and the like that can act as they desire. Often as congregations, we're very limited, we feel, in our power because we're limited in our resources, right? So systemic power is the ability to act as a group, as an institution, and often again sanctioned, legalized, if you would, by the state. And then let's just talk about politics for a moment, because I know a lot of times as pastors, what we get feedback from lay folks is if we address racism from the pulpit or speak about Black Lives Matter, or we say something, we get the pushback of we're being political. And I just want to kind of clear something up, that Political is different than being partisan. You know, partisan is when you are promoting or have an allegiance to a political party. But politics is really just the process by which we decide who has the power to act. It's how we negotiate, it's how we work through. Politics is putting it on the table, right? Who gets what, why? Who has a say, why? So you can think about even in your church, you know, who gets to choose the sanctuary carpeting, right? That's huge power in many ways. Who decided that? I remember I made a change here. We put a railing up for people for communion to have easier access to this area. And one of the older folks said, well, who gave you permission to put that railing up? Even though they used the railing. But it's this idea of, again, power to act. And in our country, our country politics is who gets to decide how money is allocated, who gets to decide how we respond. The situation right now in Portland, right? A big discussion about power in our own country, the politics of. And even in families, think about your own family. Our families have politics. Who gets to decide on where you go for vacation, right? Who gets to decide what the kids get for Christmas? Who gets to decide where we live? And so families have to negotiate politics as well. So I just want to put that out there, please. Jesus talked a lot about resources. In fact, what's really funny about Jesus is no one complained when he was feeding people, right? When he was feeding the 5,000, no one complained, no one grumbled. But when he actually sat down to eat with people, when he actually sat down and eat at the table with sinners and those who've been put out and outcast, and by sitting at the table, he gave them equal power with him. That's when people complained. So Jesus did things a lot of times to look at who had what and why. So let's go on to prejudice. To be prejudiced is someone, to prejudge someone or something without any relation to them. So prejudice is possible for anybody. And you have probably experienced prejudice in some way, shape, or form. All of us experience prejudice by people or heard it. And let's be honest, we all have our own prejudice. Sometimes it's not a bad thing, especially when we're talking about, ice cream or something of that nature. But when it comes to people and people's lives and well-being, it's a different reality. But prejudice is a person's own feelings of what they have, feelings they hold in that are not fair or just. As Jesus said, do not judge, lest you will be judged for what you're judging with. And then finally, privilege, that word we're here. Privilege is special right, advantage, or access or immunity available only to a particular person or group. So privilege is given a special right or advantage to somebody. You can think about in your own family, sometimes an oldest child or sometimes the youngest child has certain privileges. My sister is 15 years younger than me, and I have two older sisters. And my little sister, she did stuff we never could do. My parents were just tired by then. But we used to say, hey, we couldn't do that. My sister got special privileges because we had worn our parents out, I suppose. Sometimes the boss's kid, right? Nepotism. You see privileges given to somebody. Or in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, if you've followed that case at all and read about the deal he got that kept him out and free and continued to abuse young girls, that's because Jeffrey Epstein was a billionaire. He had privileges because he had a legal team that got him out. If Jeffrey Epstein was poor, he would have been locked away a long time ago. And of course, he killed himself in prison, but that's just an example of privilege for you. So here comes the big thing to wrestle with, and I'll put to you today. So racism then, beyond prejudice, beyond power, beyond privilege, racism is institutional power times group prejudice. So racism is bigger again than just what I say or think. It's the structures, it's the institutions, it's the functions that happen that have been coupled with power and prejudice. And this is just an example to work with. There are many examples of racism to define it. I try to find what is some ways the easiest. And so what's happening in our country and throughout this world is since the time of first contact, every system and every institution in the US that was created by Europeans and European Americans was structured legally and intentionally to serve the white society exclusively or in superior ways. And so that's how racism has become a part of the fabric of our society. Since our beginning, every system, every institution in the United States was created by Europeans and European Americans, was strengthened legally and intentionally to serve the white society exclusively or in superior ways. So that's again how it does play out. So here are the ways to look at racism, and I'm getting close to finishing for us to go into the next part. Racism we looked at in these four functions. It's internalized by us all. So on the individual side, we all internalize it, and it affects our interpersonal relationships. Beyond ourselves, systemically, it's institutional and it's structural. And that's where a lot of times the breakdown happens for us white folks, because again, we stay in individual, internalized or interpersonal, and don't realize how racism, how protecting white interests or promoting white supremacy happens at institutional structural levels beyond ourselves. And so in individual internalized beliefs are, again, individual. They're what you believe. They're what you own about others. And this could be racial. It could be against people of other countries. It could be someone who's gay or lesbian or transgender. And it happens, we're all bombarded with these images that we internalize either superiority or inferiority. And we don't even know what's happening, but we've all internalized in different ways this idea of who's superior and who's inferior. We get it from social cues, the media, images, education, what have you. One of the stories I share, this is actually my family right here, my wife and our dog Hershey, and my daughter and son, who are much older now. Zanaya is 11, Zachary is 8. But I like to share the story. We adopted my daughter at 3 years old. And when she first came to us, we'd be sitting at dinner, and Zanaya would comment. She would say, Mommy's black, that's my wife there. Then Zanaya would say that she was brown. She identified herself as brown. And then she looked at me and said, Daddy, you're pink. And so she would, say that every now and again, not constantly, but every now and again, Zanaya would be, observing her life and who she was as a child. And she would say, Mommy, you're black. Zanaya would say, I'm brown, she's brown. And she'd tell Daddy, you're pink. And this went on from when she was 3 years old, 4 years old. But then when she was 5 years old, she went to kindergarten. And she started kindergarten with kids of various cultures and colors and the like. And so one day my wife was doing Zanaya's hair in the living room. I was in the kitchen. I cook every now and again. I don't know what I was doing in there. Could have been cooking. But I was in the kitchen and I heard my daughter say to my wife, Mommy, did you know Daddy is white? And of course, my wife was quite aware that I was white. But it's amazing how my daughter, for the longest time, the colors that she saw, the colors she named, what was important to her, if you would, was my wife, black, she was darker skin tone than my daughter. My daughter would say that she was brown and she'd say I was pink. But what happened was somebody at school, one of the kids at school came up to her and said, Zanaya, how come you have a white daddy? And so what was happening is my daughter was beginning to be racialized. She was beginning, we see differences. That's why please don't say you're colorblind or don't try to be colorblind. God made our colors for a reason. We look the way we look because we're on the image of God. It's okay to see color. And sometimes we say, I don't see color because we're uncomfortable having these kind of talks. Please see color. The question is, what have you been programmed to interpret about the colors that you see and how we see each other? And so my son now is 8, and of course, Zachary, we adopted much younger. He was only 18 months, but he's asking a lot of questions. Dad, why are you white? Dad, your hair and his hair. We have deep conversations, but they're beginning again to look at color, but also begin to see things in the world, experience things at school that racialize us. So that's the individual internalized. Individual interpersonal occurs between individuals once we bring privately held beliefs into interaction with others. So this is where it gets down to, when people say something hateful or say something racist, they actually let their held feelings and beliefs spill out and over. They speak their own discrimination or bigotry. So that's where you see the name calling, the racist tweets, etc., that can take place. Usually what happens after we say something of this nature and we're accused, unfortunately, a lot of times as white folks, we want to insist, yeah, but I'm not a racist. You know, and then we even say, you know, I have black friends. I have, you know, for me as a white man, my wife is black. But guess what? I still have some racist thoughts and feelings and understandings in me because I've been raised in America. I have things in me that I'm constantly at war with, if you would, to be conscious and aware of. And so for me, when I'm challenged, it's not, well, I'm not this. It's like, whoa, let me reflect. What did I just say? My gosh, how did you experience it? What can I do different to help? And so that's how racism comes out in interpersonal relationships. And then we have systemic racism at institutional levels, and that's where discriminatory treatment, unfair policies and practices, and inequitable opportunities and impacts based on communities' composition. So this again is not at a personal level, this is at a people's level, this is at a community level that takes place. And a lot of times we see systemic racism institutionally in school systems where children of color are often overcrowded, or even when, you know, schools are fought over and they're trying to integrate, which we're more segregated today in our education than we were before. Even our own church, the ELCA, you know, pastors of color have far less opportunities to serve than I do. In fact, we still have churches today where people say we don't want a black pastor, or we don't want a woman pastor, or we don't want a gay pastor. I mean, to this day, we continue to have that practice in our church. And then ELCA pastors of color are paid less so often because of churches that they're limited to. And so that's institutional racism. That's how it plays out. And there would be great people in these churches kind of considerate, but the institution still functions in this way because institutions in America were set up to do that from the beginning, and they still perpetuate themselves in different ways. And then finally, racism at a structural level. And what is meant by that is basically how institutions crisscross each other. They cross-pollinate one another, if you would, for a more accumulative effect upon communities of color. So it's not just an institution where racism is found, it's in institutions that are together. And that's why, again, so often in communities of color, you have food deserts where, you know, good food, produce, healthy food is hard to come by, but you can get a bag of chips and a soda. I used to say pop if I came to Baltimore, and soda is right there. That's your breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Schools, housing, insurance, redlining, healthcare, all this that you can see of how policing in parks is how it plays out in what is, again, considered the structural level of racism. So let me see. So what I want you to think about for a moment, you're not going to answer these questions now, but one of the things you might be thinking, yes, but you know, black people can be racist too. And I just want to push you a little bit on that. I'm not here to tell you not to think that, but I want to push you a little bit because, as I told you, anyone can be prejudiced. Anyone and everyone is in some way. But I want you to think about racism in such a way as this. And this is the question I love, because I don't believe personally that it's white racism or black racism. I think racism in this country benefits white people. That's how it's set up to do, and it does still. I want you to ask yourself this question. When it comes to white racism, tell me ways in which white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people as a group. So just sit with that. You don't have to answer it now, but you're going to think about that later. How does white racism impact the lives of black communities? How are they impacted by racism, by white racism, if there's such a thing? And now let's flip it. If we have black racism, tell me ways in which black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as a group. And the way I like to always put this, where do you see a group of black or brown people sitting at a table making power decisions which directly impact white communities? If you picture Congress, the US Senate, the House of Representatives, if you picture the president's current cabinet, and that's just telling you to look at it, that's all I'm saying. Look at who's making decisions for who and how that's impacted. And where do you see, again, a group of white people in power making decisions which directly impact Black communities? Think about banks and utility companies. Think about all these ways that often it's majority, if not all, white that make decisions that have impacts directly on communities of color, which often have little to no say in what has then happened for them. So that brings me out of the racism talk. Anything on white privilege? Any questions, Kathy?
Well, so two things. One, someone pointed out that going back to just the original divisions between groups of people can happen even when they're from the same race, but they might have different, living practices, or they might be like Irish Catholic or Irish Protestant, or, you're left-handed, you're right-handed. There's things that separate people.
Yes.
So that's a point. And there was a question about, are institutional and systemic power the same?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you sort of explained that. So if you want to go back to that slide, right? Yeah. So systemic is the system, and then it's kind of like there's individual institutions, and then there's the whole system of all the institutions and how they interact with each other.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly it. So basically, institutions perpetuate racism in their own practices, but then when they're teamed up across the board, it becomes, again, at a systemic level. And we don't have enough time. And again, tonight's just an introduction to go into looking at case studies of, the criminal justice or criminal injustice system. I mean, you can look at that, unpack that all day, how closely connected it is to the education system. In the state of Indiana, you used to have these reading programs for kids in things like kindergarten or first grade, Red Bird, Blue Bird, Yellow Bird, I don't know if you remember that. And the state of Indiana would base their prison bed population on how many kids weren't reading at a third grade level by third grade. Now that's across colors. That's, no matter where the kids, but that shows the connection between education and prisons, right? They're projecting how many of these kids end up probably going to prison because of their lack of education by third grade. So that shows you how, again, this thing goes across those lines, institutions, and right. How they perpetuate that.
And then one more question is, you haven't really talked about specifically Asian racism.
Yes.
And just, the question is, are they grouped together? And no, there's all kinds of minorities, and there's intersectionality between Asian, different people of different minorities having prejudice and racism associated with it.
Right. I focus here, especially in this question about Black racism, but you can take this across the spectrum, if you would, of how we're putting races. But I didn't have time to show you. If you ever have a chance, everybody, go back and look at old census forms. Look at how over the years our census has changed who were quote unquote categorized people. You would have just Orientals, actually one time was on a census form. And then you'd have Asians, then you had Chinese, Japanese. But one thing that has always remained on our census forms is Black, white. That's been the binary we've always seen on every census form. Now you also have in quotation like African American and the like, but we've always had Black, white, and the other groups of people, if you would, kind of have to figure out where they are on that spectrum. And unfortunately, immigrant groups, reality, when immigrant groups come to this country, they don't want to be Black. They don't want to get categorized as Black because, again, being white gives you access. White means you're in, and that's why my great-great-grandfather changed his name from McGeegan to Hagen, because we got in. We got the card now. We're card-carrying members of white society. So that is a great point, though. Asians, especially out west in California, of course, the Japanese internment, the word going to hell in a handbasket that actually comes from Asians working on the railroad out west, where they would be to dynamite the tunnels. They'd be lowered in a handbasket into the mountain, and there was a good chance they'd be blown up with it. So that's where even terms we have, paddy wagons, right? Came from the paddies, from the Irish were rounded up in New York and Boston, other places. So they were being arrested. They named a whole police vehicle after us. So yeah, it's very deep. Race is very complicated. So it's not black-white. So thank you for pointing that out for us today. So let me just dance a little bit into white privilege, and then you'll be able to go to your groups. So this term I know throws us off, and that's why I like to use another term for it also, perhaps, to help us, because I don't care who you are, life is hard. And I don't care who you are, you can go through struggles, you can go through pain, agony, hardships. You know, life is hard for us all. So no one's denying anyone's experience of difficulty and hardship. But what is important is to take a step back and to look and ask ourselves, you know, what did I have hardship for? What did I have to overcome? And as a white man, I have not had to deal with, if you would, something related to my skin color. In fact, my skin color has helped me immensely when I've gone for jobs and when I've gone to college and when I went to seminary and now as a pastor. And so basically white privilege exists because of historic enduring racism and biases. You know, the fruit is still growing on this tree at this time. White privilege packs a double whammy that inspires some pushback because, again, for some of us, the word white creates discomfort because we're not used to being really referred to as white. We don't often have to struggle with what that means. As I said, the father of 2 black kids, I'm watching them. I'm hearing their struggle. What is it? Wait a minute. And especially my daughter, my God, when she learned about slavery in her history class, she came home with, it was crying. And she was like, why did this ever happen? You know, as a white person, I have to be honest, I never as a kid, first of all, they didn't teach us about slavery when I was a kid. I didn't hear about slavery, we understand it until I got to college. And that's because I took an African-American history course. And so there's stuff that as a white person, I don't have to carry or bear. But also have had to deal with my race a lot because I'll be in a homogenous setting, or mostly people like me. So it's not a relevant thing I've had to wrestle with. I would invite you to unpack your whiteness, really understand what the heck is this white thing anyways, as it's changed over the years. And then also number 2, the word privilege, especially for people who are poor or rural, white folks have often reacted. The word suggests that you've never struggled. And that's, again, not what it's saying. I like what John Powell, he's a professor at Ohio State, he likes to talk about surplus suffering, how some communities, how some have surplus suffering placed upon them. And we're learning more and more what trauma has done for generations to people. In fact, they're finding how slavery, how horrific that was from the Middle Passage on, has created changes still present today in our Black brothers and sisters. So it is stuff that we're just touching the surface of in some way to understand. So the more complicated truth is that white privilege is both unconsciously enjoyed and consciously perpetuated. It's both on the surface and deeply embedded into American life. It's a weightless knapsack, as the one book talks about unpacking your knapsack, and a weapon. Remember that lady who called the police on the bird watcher in New York? She was using her white privilege. She knows a white woman calling the cops on a black man. They were gonna believe her because of her skin color. So that's how white privilege works its way out. So just a couple more things is white people's skin tone will not be a reason people hesitate to trust their credit or financial responsibility. If white people are accused of a crime, they're less likely to be presumed guilty, less likely to be sentenced to death, and more likely to be portrayed in a fair, nuanced manner by media outlets. The personal faults or missteps of white people will likely not be used to later deny opportunities or compassion to people who share their racial identity. And this happens a lot in mass shootings. If it's done by someone who's white, well, they just had a mental illness. It reflects on them. They were a problem. If a mass shooting is someone who's Muslim or black, well, it's their religion. It's them. Them is why it happened, not that person. That's how privilege works. It gives us individuality, whereas others are judged collectively. The privilege is invisible to many white people because it seems reasonable that a person should be extended compassion as they move through the world. It seems logical that a person should have the chance to prove themselves individually before they are judged. And it's supposedly, again, an American ideal that we aspire to. But it's a privilege often not granted to people of color. And it, again, is with dire consequences. So that's my presentation. We're going to watch a quick YouTube video I think, Kathy, you're gonna take over from there. So I don't know if I should stop the sharing here. You want me to click on it and see if it goes here? Kathy?
All right, can you see my screen?
I can't. Let me stop sharing mine. I can see yours now.
Okay.
We can't hear it though. There you go. Still can't hear it. Click on share computer sound.
Mm,
Someone just told you to click on share computer sound.
oops, sorry. Am I missing something?
Someone just sent a message.
This is Chris Frim. If you click on View Options at the top, you should be able to click on not on the top of in the Zoom window where it says that you're sharing your screen. At the top,
Yeah.
the green badge, it says your screen
Yeah.
sharing. The View
Yes.
Options next to it, you should be able to click on. If you click on that, you should be able to click on Share Computer Sound.
Oh, you were not getting any sound.
Correct.
All right. Sorry about that. No, I don't know if I'm gonna be able, let me, okay, wait a minute. Share computer sound.
That's
All
a
right.
Zoom.
Here we go. Let's try this again.
And you wonder, did he lose his keys or is he blatantly stealing that bike? In broad daylight, he hammers and then saws on the chain. When that doesn't work, he pulls out an industrial-sized bolt cutter. And when he's asked, he fesses up.
You lost the lock?
No, not exactly.
But he's not a real thief. Justin Kelly is an actor, and our hidden cameras are rolling.
What happened? Nothing. I can't get through the lock. I mean, I know it's weird, but you wouldn't happen to know whose bike this is. Yeah. All right, good. Thank you.
It was odd that somebody had all that equipment.
But you didn't do anything.
No.
That's true.
That's the bottom line.
Lots of people stop and stare. A few even question the actor.
Just have to ask, is that your bike?
I guess technically no.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Good luck.
In over an hour, about 100 people pass by. Only George and Arlene try to stop him. Some tell us they plan to call the police later. Others say they're scared. Keep moving. This woman and her friends give our thief the benefit of the doubt. When we ask why, Visa Washington tells us first impressions matter.
I remember thinking young white men don't usually carry burglar tools.
So we all make assumptions, huh?
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe he works for the park.
We replace our white thief with this young man, Matlock. Remember, both actors dress in a similar way and are about the same age.
Is that your bike?
Nah.
Then what are you cutting the chain for?
Right away, somebody yelled. Wow. Within seconds, another person confronts our thief.
Is that your bike?
Technically it's not, but it's gonna be mine.
More people converge.
Is that on the cell phone? You call the police. He's like stealing somebody's bike.
Are you taking that bike? That's your bike?
No, it's not, sir.
Oh, why are you doing that?
Is this any of y'all bikes? Is this your bike?
It's not, it belongs
No, but whoever's it is.
It belongs to someone.
To who?
Well, not to you.
And sure enough, one man whips out a cell phone to call 911.
Yeah, there's someone taking a bike here.
Our actor triggers more reaction. Some people are even snapping pictures for evidence.
I got you, bud. I got you.
You guys stealing a bike. Whose bike's over here?
Once everyone moves away, we reset our cameras, and within minutes, another outraged man is yelling.
Are you trying to steal that bike?
Excuse me, sir, but the bike's been here for days. Like, no one's gonna take it.
Well, that's not your bike then.
Yeah,
You can't just come in and take something from somebody.
excuse me, sir. I'm not...
Okay, I'll just take your tools away then. You sure, sir?
Please, sir, don't touch my stuff, sir. Please, sir, do not touch my
Well,
stuff.
you're touching
Please.
somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, all right, but this has been here. Like, who's gonna take it?
Well, that doesn't make it your property.
Technically, it does.
No, it doesn't technically. It's not yours to take.
All right, sir.
When we bring out our cameras, David Robb wants us to go after the thief.
That kid in the red shirt.
He's hacking away at a bike that's not his.
Days, and he has a right to take it and steal it. And he's come here.
She may not look like your average bike thief, but actress Ashley Carpenter makes sure anyone who asks knows she's up to no good.
Need a hand?
You don't know whose this is, do you?
Whose bike it is?
Yeah.
With a little help from Ed Fitzsimmons, the bike chain easily falls away.
Yup, everywhere. Oh my goodness, what a strong man you are.
And he isn't the only man who stops in his tracks. What's this guy thinking?
You know, you pull up, you don't know if she lost her key, if she's trying to actually take the bike, but then again, she's a girl. And would you ever see a girl doing that?
Steal?
You never know. Most of the times, it's a guy gonna do something like that.
Reginald pedals right past his appalled wife, straight to our actress, asking her if she needs a hand.
You need help?
Okay, I'll eventually get it.
I do some time in Rollway. I can steal this.
Oh, you can steal it? Maybe you can help me steal it.
Okay.
I also have that census thing we're referring to if you want to share. If you want me to show that.
Yeah, it's
anyone's interested.
already after 8 o'clock though. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, yeah. No, we need to move on.
So I'm not sure, Kathy, how you want to do the groups, or Justina, did you set that up already?
Yes, it's set up and ready to go.
Okay.
So do you want to give people some instructions about their time?
Yeah.
We're gonna,
Well, first of all, we just want you to talk about what you heard today, what may have been something revealing to you or challenging to you. So you can share that in your groups, what you heard today, what you were challenged by, or something new for you. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing for you to consider is what are the implications, or what are the challenges your congregation you represent faces in beginning to address racism and to become anti-racist, which you'll get more of later in these meetings that take place, these workshops. But you can kind of talk a little bit about your own context and, you know, where your congregation is, and talking about racism and working through it and countering it. So what did you individually hear today? What did you hear that was new or challenging for you, or even perhaps disagreeable? You know, that's fine. We're in dialogue now. And then second, what are the challenges to the congregation that you represent when it comes to facing and dealing with addressing the sin of racism? Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go into breakout groups. Justina's going to give us a countdown, and we'll do that for about 20 minutes. And then we'll come back just to do a sign off.
And maybe everyone.
Oh, wait a minute now. Exit full screen. Okay. So unless there's any burning questions, our time is done. I'm so appreciative of your participation, and we're going to be doing this again for the next 3 Mondays. So next week's session is delving more into the national history of racial inequality And the presenter is going to be talking from the perspective of some lynchings that happened on the Eastern Shore and tying that into national history. And again, feel free to email me if you want to talk privately or separately about anything that you heard, or if you have ideas of something else that you want to accomplish in your congregation and you think we can support you in that, I'd be happy to do what I can. So sign off and have a blessed rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Smith, she's a
Thank
new host.
you.